It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. The US retaliates. Airstrikes begin on targets in Iraq and Syria in response to attacks on a base in Jordan. We'll be live in Iraq. Also tonight, Brianna Ghey's killers are given life sentences as her father tells Sky News he feels nothing but anger.
I think they should just be forgot about, locked up and not even spoke about again, because they're nothing.
How come I'm a suspect?
Pardon?
How come I'm a suspect?
How come you're a suspect?
Because I'm the last person that's seen them.
You enjoyed the killing. The judge releases videos of the arrest of Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe, as well as the moment they met up with Brianna before murdering her. Police raid a flat in East London searching for the chemical attack suspect, who's still on the run after 2 days. We speak to some men claiming asylum on the grounds of Christianity after it's revealed Abdul Zaidi was allowed to stay in the UK after converting and after being convicted of a sexual offence. Sinn Féin's Michelle O'Neill to become Northern Ireland's first nationalist First Minister tomorrow, signalling a changing tide for Stormont. Actor Carl Weathers, best known for playing Apollo Creed in the Rocky films, dies, aged 76. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening. Breaking news tonight, and in the last half an hour, it's been confirmed that the United States have retaliated for the deaths of 3 soldiers who were killed by a drone attack in a base in Jordan. A US defense official has said that airstrikes have hit targets in Iraq and in Syria. President Biden joined grieving families earlier as the bodies of 3 American service members were brought back to the US. Let's speak now to our international correspondent, John Sparks, and in a moment to our US correspondent, Mark Stone. John, to you first of all, bring us up to date with everything that you know up to this point.
Hi, Gillian. Clearly a major campaign now underway by the Americans. We understand that they have hit 85 targets in Syria and in Iraq using 125 precision weapons, using long-range bombers, in some cases flown from the United States to do this attack. We are getting reports from official and unofficial sources here in Iraq and also in Syria. Let me quickly tell you what we are hearing. Attacks in the eastern province in Syria of Deir ez-Zor. The Americans have hit 2 cities there, Mayadeen and El Bu Kamal. They have also hit the western region of Iraq, Anbar province as well. There are reports now coming through of fatalities and injuries. At least 10 militia members, some of those non-Syrian, now being reported by Syrian state media. This is clearly a very serious attack. It's clearly the beginning of what is a new phase in this regional conflict, a conflict that began in Gaza on October 7th. This is a new phase, a dangerous new phase for everybody involved. It's a calculated response from the Americans. Really important to say that. They've had 6 days to think about this attack. That since the strike by an Iran-backed militia on Post 22, Tower 22 in Jordan. The Americans have had time to think about this. They've had time to choose their targets. They've had time to think about the message that each target, each attack sends. And here in Iraq, a great deal of anxiety has been caused, paranoia as well. Those 6 days also giving time for members of these militias, senior members of these militias. It's given them time to hide, also to hide their weapons and their arsenal. But make no doubt about it, this is a major new escalation in this regional campaign, this regional conflict.
Let's cross to Mark Stone in Washington for us. And 85 targets hit this evening. We knew this was coming, didn't we, Mark?
We did. It was some days ago now, I think on Wednesday, when President Biden was asked whether he had decided if he would retaliate against Iran or Iranian backed proxies following the death on Sunday of those 3 US service personnel and the injury of so many more. And his response was straightforward. Yes, he said. And since then, there has been much speculation, much anticipation about what that response would look like. I think John is absolutely right. It has been targeted, and the timing is very interesting as well, because they have waited until tonight, Friday night, the end of a day when the bodies of those 3 US service personnel arrived back here on US soil at Dover Air Force Base up in Delaware. That is where President Biden was today, and it is where he remains tonight. We do not expect to hear from him in person tonight. What I can tell you is that these airstrikes, it's dark, of course, in the Middle East now, so we won't see what damage has been done, but they will want to have made sure that the civilian casualties are either 0 or a very, very minimum. The idea behind this is to re-establish deterrence, to stop what, remember, has been more than 160 attacks over the course of the past few months by Iranian-backed proxy groups in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen as well, to try and stop those attacks from happening. And that is the reason the Americans say behind what we are now seeing unfold. I can also tell you that it won't just be the strikes that we've seen tonight. The expectation, and certainly what I'm being told, is that this will be, some are using the word campaign, I think certainly a weekend of airstrikes against proxy groups in Iraq and in Syria. The Syrian government, through state media, has already reacted with anger, talking about American aggression. We haven't yet had any word from the Iraqi government, but remember, this isn't the first time the Americans have conducted airstrikes both in Iraq and in Syria in the last few weeks. Over at Christmas, they conducted airstrikes in Iraq, and in November in Syria as well. The difference then is that these were single airstrikes to take out specific targets. What we're seeing now is multiple targets, as I say, an attempt to re-establish deterrence.
OK, Mark in Washington, D.C. and John Sparks in Erbil. We might be back to you later this evening. Thank you so much for the moment. I have no feelings, only anger. Those the words from Brianna Ghey's father, who's told Sky News his daughter's killers are monsters. Brianna was 16 when she was stabbed 28 times in Warrington in February last year. Her sister told the court that the happy memories they'd had together have been overpowered by the moment she heard what had happened to Brianna. The judge ruled that Brianna's killers could be named today, despite being 15 at the time of the killing. They're Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe. Mrs. Justice Yip said they both took part in a brutal planned murder, which was sadistic in nature, and sentenced Jenkinson to 22 years and Ratcliffe to 20 years in prison. More about Brianna's final moments in the next few minutes. But first, Sky's chief North of England correspondent Greg Milam reports, and a warning, there are details which people may find hard to hear.
On a Saturday afternoon at the bus stop, Brianna Ghey, dressed in white, meets up with the 2 people who barely an hour later would murder her. Girl X in that video was Scarlett Jenkinson, boy Y, Eddie Ratcliffe, described as intelligent, high-functioning teenagers who hid a warped obsession with murder and who planned in meticulous detail how they would kill a girl who thought she could trust them. After the killing, Eddie Ratcliffe boarded the bus to go home. He was arrested the next day.
I can explain everything.
I can explain, he says to police. Simultaneously, Scarlett Jenkinson was also arrested.
How come I'm a suspect?
Pardon?
How come I'm a suspect?
How come you're a suspect?
Is it because I'm the last person at scene, or is it?
In the months that followed and during their trial, they blamed each other. Their preoccupation with violence, death and torture played out in thousands of messages. Jenkinson repeatedly changing her story. The judge said it was impossible to believe anything she said. In fact, it all played out as the note found in her bedroom predicted, with a smiley face and a heart, along with pages of details about high-profile serial killers. In court, Brianna's mum, Esther, told of the grief and the devastation. The thought that 2 could ever be released, she said, horrifies her. Brianna's dad told Sky News what he thinks of them.
I have no feelings. Well, there's only anger towards him. If I'm honest, I hate him. They're just evil, you know, for what they've done, and I don't think they'll ever change. I think they'll always be monsters, and that's what they are to me. That's my feelings with them. They're just a pair of monsters. At first, you know, I thought, yeah, they should be named. Why should they be protected? You know, people should know who they are. And now I think the name's always going to be connected, you know, tied with Brianna all the time. So I just think they shouldn't be named. I think they should just be forgot about, locked up, and not even spoke about again, because they're nothing. I'll never stop thinking about Brianna. I know she'll live on in my dreams, and that's all I keep thinking about, her on her own in that park with them and what they've done. And I really wish I was there to protect her. And that's just what I have in my head all the time. I can't get it out my head, you know, what's happened to her.
For Brianna's family, it's made all the worse that she thought of Jenkinson as a friend. She'd been moved to Brianna's school after bringing cannabis edibles to her previous one. She was about to be returned there.
When it first happened, you know, I felt like there was a level of responsibility because they'd met at this school. But in terms of actually how we could have in any way have stopped that happening, there were no signs, there were no red flags.
A review is now ongoing. The decision to lift reporting restrictions mean the killers' names and faces are known. The judge said a pair who had other targets as well may never be released.
I therefore find that you both took part in a brutal and planned murder which was sadistic in nature and where a secondary motive was hostility towards Brianna because of her transgender identity. You picked Brianna because you both thought she would be an easy target. In doing so, you, Scarlett, abused her trust. She thought you were her friend. You encouraged her not to be anxious and guided her through getting the bus. Eddie, you knew Scarlett was preying on Brianna in this way.
For Brianna's parents, any freedom would come too soon. For an anxious child who they say showed bravery to leave the house on her own that day and who paid with her life. Greg Milam, Sky News, Manchester Crown Court.
The judge said today that Brianna Ghey's killers will be jailed until they no longer present a danger to the public, saying Scarlett Jenkinson had a deep desire to kill. Sky's data and forensics team have tracked those final moments before Brianna was murdered. Here's Tom Cheshire.
There was no way she could have known, but this was the moment that Brianna Ghey left her home for the last time. A Saturday morning, on her way to meet people she thought were her friends. Earlier that day, the 11th of February, Scarlett Jenkinson had texted Brianna, telling her to meet her and Eddie Ratcliffe in Colchester. She was luring Brianna to her death. Brianna left home at 12:45, walking a mile to the bus stop that Jenkinson had told her to go to, even though there was another right by her house. Jenkinson had also told her to buy a child's one-way ticket. Brianna was an anxious teenager, and she texted her mum, "I'm on the bus by myself. I'm scared." But her mother Esther was proud of her for going out of her comfort zone. She met Jenkinson, referred to throughout the trial as Girl X, and Ratcliffe, Boy Y, at the bus stop outside the local library. They walked past a Sainsbury's, where minutes earlier the pair had bought bottles of Dr. Pepper and Coca-Cola that would eventually tie them to the scene of the crime. As they walked through a series of alleyways, the group were last seen on CCTV heading towards Linear Park at 2:02 p.m. Brianna had little more than an hour left to live. As the teenagers walked through the park, they messaged each other on Snapchat about a plan to take drugs together. At 2:15, Brianna sent a message to Jenkinson saying she was anxious. Jenkinson was supposedly messaging a drug dealer at the same time, but this was a ruse. She had set up a fake Snapchat account which she was using to pretend to be a dealer called Nathan. She would message him and then reply to herself. Brianna grew suspicious. At 2:30, she messaged another friend, saying she thought Jenkinson was pretending to have a drug dealer. What exactly unfolded over the next few minutes is known only to Jenkinson and Ratcliffe. But based on the number of wounds on her body, Brianna was subjected to a sustained and violent assault with a hunting knife. Brianna was stabbed more than 28 times, across her head, her neck, her chest, and her back. At 3:06, Brianna's phone sent a message to Jenkinson. "Girl, where are you?" But it was not Brianna. It was Jenkinson, trying to establish an alibi for herself. She would later tell police Brianna had disappeared with a boy from Manchester. Minutes later, a dog walker saw Jenkinson and Ratcliffe making their way to the next field and breaking into a run. Around 3:15, the dog walker called 999, asking for police and ambulance. Someone had been attacked, and she'd seen people running away. Ratcliffe and Jenkinson had already left the woods. A car's dash cam caught them here on the right. They threw Brianna's phone into a drain on the way. They then returned to their separate homes. Jenkinson walked, Ratcliffe took the bus. Brianna was declared dead at the scene. Police arrested her murderers the next day. Tom Cheshire, Sky News.
Let's return to our top story in the breaking news. The US airstrikes in Iraq and Syria. Mark Stone standing by for us in Washington, D.C. We've heard from the President, Mark.
Yes, a statement from President Biden has been released just in the last couple of minutes, and it says, this afternoon at my direction, US military forces struck targets at facilities in Iraq and Syria that the IRGC, that's the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and affiliated militia use to attack US forces. He goes on to say, our response began today. It will continue at times and places of our choosing. And he finishes by saying the United States does not seek conflict in the Middle East or anywhere else in the world, but let all those who might seek to do us harm know this. If you harm Americans, we will respond. That statement there after what we have been expecting would come since Sunday, when those 3 US soldiers were killed in that military base on the Jordanian, Iraqi, Syrian border. Ever since then, President Biden has said he would strike back at the people he believed to be responsible, Iranian militia, Iranian-backed proxy groups in Iraq and in Syria. And tonight, that retaliation has begun. It's worth saying this is not the first time that the Americans have hit targets in Iraq and in Syria since this latest escalation, since Hamas attacked Israel back in October. From my count, there have been 3 occasions before this one where there have been attacks by the American military in both Iraq and in Syria. The difference here, I think, will be the scale. We know that they are attacking storage sites and other command bases that have been used by Iranian proxy groups in Iraq and in Syria. And so the scale here is different. The hope from an American perspective is that they can re-establish deterrence and to stop Iranians from attacking their assets, their forces in the region.
OK, Mark, for the moment, thank you. We'll be back to you for any further updates. Thank you. The hunt for Abdel Azzadi continues tonight, with police releasing new images of the chemical attack suspect. Officers raided a flat in East London today, where it's believed the Azzadi's brother lives. Abdel Azzadi is suspected of attacking a mother and 2 children in Clapham on Wednesday night. Sky's crime correspondent Martin Brunt reports.
Police preparing for a raid, heavily protected against what they might find in their hunt for the corrosive attacker. Their target, a block of flats, the home of their suspect's brother. Residents were woken in their beds.
What I need you to do is come out of the address slowly, OK? On my instructions. We have police officers with a warrant to search the address, OK?
Okay.
Put your hands on your head, OK? And walk slowly towards me, OK?
Okay. Have you seen anyone with an injured eye still?
Still on the run, suspect Abdel Azzadi was injured in the attack on a woman and her 2 daughters in Clapham on Wednesday night. Police appealed directly to the wanted man.
Abdel, you clearly have got some very significant injuries. We've seen the images. You need some medical help. So do the right thing and hand yourself in.
Azzadi left his home in Newcastle early on Wednesday and drove south to London. Before dawn, he was in Tooting. Much later, he was in Croydon. By 7 p.m, Streatham. 25 minutes later, the attack took place at Lesser Avenue in Clapham. Soon after, Azzadi got on a tube at Clapham South Station. He was at King's Cross by 8 p.m. Just before 9 p.m, Yazidi was caught on camera at Tesco on the Caledonian Road. The last image shows him entering King's Cross tube station, where he boarded a Victoria Line train heading south. The attack with a corrosive substance was caught on a security camera. The woman victim is in hospital, sedated with expected life-changing injuries. Her 2 daughters weren't so badly hurt. The attack has refocused concern over the issue of male violence against women and girls.
We know that he was convicted of a sexual offence before, and I think to myself, how seriously was that taken? We know, for example, that you are more likely to, because of the types of sentencing we have, receive a higher sentence for attacking a statue than you would a woman.
The raid on the suspect's brother's home was one of several in a wide police operation. Before dawn, residents were allowed back into their flats here. It's not thought police found anything hazardous. But they did say later that they had recovered important evidence in a total of 5 raids, 2 in London and 3 in Newcastle. Police continue to warn the public not to approach the suspect, but to dial 999. Martin Brunt, Sky News in East London.
Well, the case raises serious concerns about why Abdul Yazidi was granted asylum despite being a convicted sex offender. Sky News has been speaking to some men claiming asylum who say that, like Yazidi, many people are converting to Christianity. Becky Johnson has more.
In the midst of a nationwide manhunt, we now know Abdul Yazidi was granted asylum after being convicted of sex offences. In 2018, he admitted sexual assault and indecent exposure and was handed a suspended prison sentence at Newcastle Crown Court. But despite being on the sex offenders register and 2 earlier failed asylum bids, in 2020 a tribunal granted his claim after a priest told them he'd converted to Christianity. Here in the Home Secretary's constituency, we found anger.
Total disgrace that the government, are letting people in like that to this country. We're all in danger.
It's acid and everything that's happened. Who on earth allowed him to come in the first place?
They're used to seeing asylum seekers here from nearby RAF Wethersfield, where hundreds are housed. And the local vicars are kept busy. Around 20 of the men were baptised just last weekend. Being a Christian is deemed a reason it's unsafe for people to return to some countries. Your claim is on the grounds of Christianity also?
Yeah, most of them.
Most of the people?
Yeah.
Most of the claims are they?
Christianity, yeah.
But he doesn't think Yazidi should have been allowed to stay.
As we are here, we must respect and govern by the law of the Constitution of UK.
For people in communities like this one, with asylum seekers housed close by, there is no way of knowing how many have criminal records because the Home Office don't publicly provide the data. Hearing that someone like Yazidi was granted asylum will only add to the anxiety. The government says its Rwanda policy will tackle those concerns. But there are already rules around deportation of foreign criminals. Yazidi's sentence wasn't long enough to meet the criteria, and his claim of being unsafe as a Christian in Afghanistan a legitimate ground for appeal. And his case isn't unique.
I had a specific client who must have had over 24 offences, and he could not be returned back to Iran.
The government would seek to blame people like you, who they might describe as lefty lawyers, for creating this problem. What would you say to that?
They don't understand the laws, they don't understand European Convention of Human Rights, and as a result of their ignorance, I feel that they're choosing a scapegoat.
When the asylum process allows a man like this to stay, it's little wonder public support for the system is at breaking point. Becky Johnson, Sky News in Wethersfield.
The Labour Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner, has told Sky News her party will reform workers' rights should they win the next general election. In an interview with our political editor, Beth Rigby, she says Labour would put an end to so-called zero-hour contracts and help to foster greater security for low-wage workers. She also responded to concerns around MP safety after being confronted by pro-Palestine activists last week. A warning: Beth's report contains flash photography from the start.
Hoping to call time on the Tories and the SNP, Labour knows in the next election Scotland is key. Angela Rayner touring a distillery near Edinburgh with Scottish Labour's Anna Sarwar to promote what Labour's dubbed the biggest levelling up of workers' rights in decades, and give this man something to sell on the doorstep.
This is the most transformative package on workers' rights for a generation. To finally end the scandal of exploitative zero-hour contracts, to end the scandal of fire and rehire, and to make the minimum wage a real living wage, that will have a transformative effect for workers.
As Labour rose back on its green investment plan and capping bankers' bonuses, the Deputy Leader doubling down on her radical workplace reforms.
Well, it's security at work more than anything. Fundamentally, it's rights from day one. It's ending fire and rehire, and it's giving people guaranteed hours and making sure that people have that level of security. We will bring in the single status of worker. We will end this bogus self-employment. Okay. That is our mission as part of the New Deal.
The message from Rayner clear: there'll be no rowing back on workers' rights in the first Labour term.
The change of this country has come when you...
But as she eyes public office, the downsides made plain to see. Ms Rayner confronted at a fundraiser event in Stockport last week, which left her shaken.
Yes, I was scared, and my family are scared for me. When you get the levels of abuse and threats that MPs get now, when someone comes at you, you don't know. You honestly don't know. When someone's shouting and they come over at you, you don't know what's coming. I didn't know what's coming at me, and it did affect me, and it has affected me since that incident.
Do you ever think about packing it in because of it or not, ever?
I don't think about packing it in because I think that's our democracy.
Catching up the SNP in Scotland and way ahead of the Tories down south, Labour has the taste of victory, but no celebrations yet. Beth Rigby, Sky News Scotland.
Party leaders and officials have met to discuss the priorities for the first day of the new government in Northern Ireland. As power sharing returns and as Stormont sitting tomorrow for the first time in 2 years, Sky News examines the impact of Michelle O'Neill becoming the first ever nationalist First Minister in Stormont's history. Our senior Ireland correspondent David Blevins reports from the new First Minister's hometown in County Tyrone.
She is the pride of Clanoe, a remote village in County Tyrone, far from the corridors of power at Stormont. At Primate Dixon Primary School, they never doubted that former pupil Michelle O'Neill would write a new chapter in politics.
Everyone in the school is just incredibly proud that the day is coming at last when we're seeing history in the making, that Michelle O'Neill will be taking up the role of First Nationalist First Minister of the North.
In this small community, they speak highly of her.
She certainly would have put Clanoe on the map, that's for certain.
And friends say she's never forgotten her humble roots here.
She just lives literally, I suppose, from me about 200 yards. So she's a neighbour.
And who is the Michelle O'Neill you know?
The Michelle O'Neill I know, and most people around here would basically know, as what you would describe as the girl next door.
The old guard has gone. Michelle O'Neill, part of the Sinn Féin rebrand, but her background is staunchly Irish Republican. Her father a Sinn Féin councillor, her uncle an IRA member shot dead by the SAS. Ursula Donnelly, whose brother was also shot dead, has been her neighbour for 4 decades.
Clanoe has went through a hell of a lot through the years, and my own brother was murdered in 1983 by the SAS in Clanoe. And I hope we get the justice now that we have somebody here representing us. And Michelle will fight for everybody, no matter what your religion, your creed or whatever.
Michelle O'Neill won't have more power than she had when she was Deputy First Minister. The two most senior offices are codependent. But here in her native Tyrone, they know it's hugely symbolic for a woman who seeks Irish unity to hold the title First Minister. She was the first Irish Republican to attend the coronation of a British monarch, and on Tyrone's ancient Hill of the O'Neill shared her hope for the future.
I grew up in a society where my community were discriminated against. I grew up in a society where war came to my community. So I think we have to understand each other's perspective, that we all come from from a different lived experience. But let's respect that, let's respect each other, and let's find ways to ensure that we build a better society.
She has spoken candidly about becoming a mother at the age of 16 and how that shaped her life. Her elevation truly marks the culmination of the Irish Republican journey from guns.
Has died aged 76, according to his family. Best known for his role as villain turned hero Apollo Creed in the first 4 Rocky films, Mr. Weathers went on to star in Predator, Happy Gilmore, and most recently The Mandalorian in 2021. He was nominated for an Emmy for his role in that film. He also directed a number of episodes from the Star Wars series, as well as episodes of Law and Order. Let's return now to those airstrikes which have begun in Iraq and Syria as the United States retaliates for the deaths of 3 US soldiers killed in a drone attack in Jordan. Our international correspondent John Sparks joins me now from Erbil in the Kurdish region of northern Iraq. And John, what can you tell us about exactly where has been hit?
Hi, Gillian. Clearly, we are at the beginning of a new phase, a dangerous new phase in this conflict. We have seen a calculated response, a powerful response from the Americans. We are hearing from official and unofficial sources here in Iraq, also in Syria, that extensive targets in eastern Syria in the province of Deir el-Zur have been hit. Also, the western Iraqi province of Anbar as well. Syrian cities Mayadin and Elbu Kamal have been hit extensively by the Americans. Syrian state media reporting deaths, multiple injuries, including 10 militiamen as well who have died. We are also hearing in the last few minutes that one of the Iran-backed militias has retaliated this evening against 2 US bases in northeast Syria. Reports there that there is a fire at one of the base. Retaliations, it seems, have started. That's one of the big questions. Where does this go? Where does this major US strike go? President Joe Biden, he says it will continue in times and places of the Americans choosing, but what does it do on the ground? What are the consequences? That's the big question tonight.
John, thank you. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and Jake Wallace-Simons, editor of The Jewish Chronicle. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of The Mirror, the headline, Pure Evil, as it leads with the murder of Brianna Ghey. We'll be right back. welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. The United States have retaliated for the deaths of 3 soldiers who were killed by a drone attack in a base in Jordan, with US defence officials confirming airstrikes have hit targets in Iraq and in Syria. The killers of a transgender teenager, Brianna Ghey, have been given life sentences and named as 16-year-old Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe. Detectives involved in a countrywide manhunt have appealed for the public's help to find a man wanted in connection with a corrosive attack in South London that left a woman with life-changing injuries and 2 children in hospital. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and Jake Wallace-Simons, editor of the Jewish Chronicle. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Telegraph leads with the story about one of Brianna Ghey's murderers. It reports that 16-year-old Scarlett Jenkinson had a lust for fame and was obsessed with serial killers. Brianna Ghey's killers also make the front page of the Daily Express. Their identity now revealed, with the judge saying their motives were driven partly by transphobia. The Daily Mail leads with words from Brianna's mother about her daughter's killers. Eddie Ratcliffe was motivated by hate and Scarlett Jenkinson killed for fun. The Daily Mirror's headline, Pure Evil, the words used by Brianna's father to describe her killers. It's also the main story on The Guardian tomorrow. The headline reads, Exceptionally brutal, teens jailed for murder. The Eye Weekend leads with pressure the Chancellor is facing to announce income tax cuts in his spring budget. The FT Weekend reports US job growth figures for January were almost twice those that were forecast, with economists left speechless by what they've described as stunning numbers. The search for a suspect wanted over a chemical attack and the Home Office approving his asylum claim is on the front of the Times. Its headline, Outcry over asylum for suspect in Alkali attack. And on the front of the Daily Star, a story about the price of love, apparently. It'll cost you £9.67 a day. Don't know exactly what that's for. We shall find out. A reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Susie Boniface and Jake Wallace-Simons. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us. A story which I wasn't sure that many of the papers would be able to pick up on in time, but these are the strikes in Iraq and Syria that the US has launched tonight in retaliation, Jake.
Yes, I mean, the US had to respond after 3 of its servicemen or servicemen and women were killed in a strike on the border of Jordan and Syria a few days ago. So it had to retaliate. But it strikes me that these strikes, as powerful as they are and as long-lasting as they will be, it seems that this is just the first wave. They're not on Iran itself, and that's a crucial decision being made by the Biden administration. And really it shows that a reluctance to get drawn into anything heavier, which you can understand, a keenness to avoid escalation, but at the same time, it's being drawn into Iran's game, which is to use these proxy militia to do the Ayatollah's bidding without any pain absorbed by the Iranian regime itself. And in the past, America has attacked Iran itself with some quite good results. There was the killing of Soleimani, which Trump authorised in 2020. Everyone thought there'd be World War III then. There wasn't. It sort of tamed the Iranian threat temporarily. As far back as 1988, President Reagan did a similar thing by attacking the Iranian Navy, which precipitated the end of the Iran-Iraq war. So I think that really Biden, if he wants to really cause Iran to draw in its horns, needs to start thinking about attacking various targets in Iran itself.
Mm. Well, we heard specifically from Lloyd Austin, the US Secretary of State for Defence, yesterday that we are not at war with Iran. That was very, very plain. And in the past, we've also known that that's not something that America wants and not particularly something that Iran wants.
Well,
let's back up a minute here. The reason that these missile strikes have been happening in the Gulf is because Iran has funded them and because it's come out of October the 7th and the massacre in Israel. And the massacre in Israel was done by Hamas, which was funded and supplied by Iran. And Iran, in that region, is one of the countries which has absolutely refused to discuss trade or further development with Israel, and which is so ragingly anti-Semitic, it wants to create a war with the West about Israel. It wants to draw that whole area into a massive conflict. That's why it's seeding these terror groups around the region. And so far, it has got everything it wants. It has got Joe Biden dealing with the symptoms, with the Houthis, with this thing happening in Syria and stuff like that. Too frightened to take on Iran itself, because that would just blow up into a massive conflict. It's got us talking about how if you can solve Israel and Palestine and get some kind of a treaty or a ceasefire there, that would mollify Iran and things would calm down. And it wouldn't. Iran still has a huge problem with Israel even existing. If you mollify Iran, it's simply a form of appeasement. And so I fear that what you're actually getting here is Iran has everything it wants. It's getting everything it wants. It's getting this kind of increased conflict and causing huge headaches for the West. And what it always wants is something more. It wants more of a fight all the time. And it's going to have to be dealt with, and it's going to be horrific.
Do you think that Iran actually wants America to attack?
The Iranian people don't. The Iranian people protest their government.
But the government, you think the government does?
The people who run Iran very much would benefit from any kind of attack, whether you're attacking the Houthis, whether you're attacking in Syria, whether you're attacking Iraqi insurgents, whether you're attacking Iran itself. They benefit and they can exploit it.
I mean, also, I think people don't understand the mentality of the regime and the theology that they follow, which basically is hankering after an apocalyptic war to bring a messianic figure called the Mahdi out in visibility and to conquer the world and make it all Islamic and so forth. So really they are trying to provoke a world war in order to precipitate that mythical period. And let's not forget that behind all of this, they're pursuing nuclear weapons, which everybody's forgetting about because we're distracted by Gaza, the Houthis, and now this.
Let's just bring in a statement that we've got from the Iraqi military. They're saying that the cities of Al-Qaim and the Iraqi border areas are being subjected to airstrikes by United States aircraft, as these strikes come at a time when Iraq is striving to ensure the stability of the region. These strikes constitute a violation of Iraqi sovereignty, an undermining of the efforts of the Iraqi government, and a threat that will drag Iraq and the region into unforeseen consequences, the consequences of which will be disastrous for security and stability in Iraq and the region. That's the Major General Special Forces, Yahya Messenger Abdullah. That's the very latest that we're hearing from Iraq. So certainly there, not a will to expand the conflict in the region.
But at the same time, they kind of allowed it to happen because they allowed Iranian-backed forces to come and operate within Iraq. And the current Iraqi government and administration isn't able to control its own territory. And so Iranians and rebels and militants of all different sorts around there. And there are many, many groups, ISIS, I can't remember the names of some of the others, but who believe in who believe in an apocalyptic end times coming soon, and they want to sort of get themselves ready for the second coming. And actually, they do believe Jesus is coming back, don't they? And he's going to rapture everybody, and they just want to get ready for it and to murder as many people as possible before they get there. And, you know, Iraq can't control its own territory, and that's partly because of the horrible conflicts that we've started in that part of the world. The whole place is an absolute mess.
But also, I mean, it strikes me, you quoted those remarks from Lloyd Austin that we don't want war with Iran. America is at war with Iran already via these proxy militia, and has been for a long time, America and its allies. This is already happening, and it's going to be escalated again and again by the Iranians, playing us for fools by using proxy militia, by pushing the envelope and just finding a point where the Americans will respond a bit but not too much, and all the time in the background pursuing nuclear weapons. They're very, very close to getting a nuclear bomb and only getting closer week by week. It's a real danger, and the longer that we go by without America taking the lead and actually confronting this enemy, the more dangerous it becomes.
And you think that can only be by them striking on Iranian
It has to be. It has to be. In the past, whenever that's happened to the Iranians, they have drawn back. America is many times more powerful than Iran in terms of its military, in terms of its economic size and its global weight. It has the advantage. President Trump knew that when he was in power. And I'm not a great fan of President Trump overall, but he knew that. And he acted upon it by killing Soleimani, and it had a good effect. But Biden needs to start to do the same to enforce a deterrent on the Iranians before it's too late.
Well, also, when they killed Soleimani, there was back-channel conversations between American and Iranian diplomats to say, we don't want to go any further with this, do we, boys? And everyone sort of backed down a bit. I don't think Iran's currently in that same place to have that same conversation. They're not remotely deterred. And unfortunately, the issue isn't really whether Iran has nuclear weapons. It's the fact they have nuclear power plants and the ability to have some fissile material, which is not enough to be a nuclear weapon. But if you were to go and have boots on the ground, have any kind of a strike on Iranian soil, the mess, the radioactive fallout and the waste that could come out from that could be hugely toxic for many tens of thousands of years. The West interfering in that part of the world has caused huge numbers of problems for centuries, but what you're going to see if Iran is allowed to carry on doing what it has been doing is exactly the kind of failed states, vicious wars, which drive immigration and drive political problems at home. It has to be something that we actually, as a world, as a planet, decide we're going to have to try and do something about. But unfortunately, the other superpowers, Russia and China, are not interested.
Well, let's just end with a line from the Secretary of Defence, Lloyd Austin, saying we do not seek conflict in the Middle East or anywhere else, but the President and I will not tolerate attacks on American forces. And Joe Biden saying tonight, if you harm an American, we will respond. We'll leave that there for this section. But coming up, pure evil. We'll discuss the sentencing of Brianna Ghey's killers dominating the newspapers. Do stay with us.
I went through a similar experience where I was sentenced to the electric chair. I remember the judge telling me I was going to be taken to the Rockview State Prison where 2,200 volts of electricity would course through my body and end my life. And then they changed it and made it lethal injection. So I wasn't ever sentenced to be stabbed with a needle, but they changed it. And that's what they're doing here. So what's bothering me, is troubling me, is they tried to execute this man for hours with needles. Imagine laying on a gurney and they're poking you in your groin, in your neck, all over your body, trying to get a vein to murder you, and you succeed in surviving that, only to be an experiment like a guinea pig. So this is horrifying that the state of Oklahoma and the state of Mississippi are going to start doing this, because successfully, opponents of the death penalty stopped them from getting the drugs. I'm so grateful that I went to death row, because all my childhood friends died of drug overdoses or violence or suicide, and I was spared the AIDS epidemic, and I started to learn self-respect and self-love. And I elevated my entire life because I was on death row. And even though I was there wrongly, it didn't matter. I needed to use that opportunity. I was physically tortured for years for being a rapist murderer they thought was mentally ill. I went through a lot of degradations, but I learned when people are harming you, you can really find it within yourself at that moment to love you. I was suffering from hepatitis C infection after they beat me and broke my teeth in prison, and I contracted this illness that was killing my fellow prisoners. So after listening to them die in horrifying fashion with the nurses taunting them, I asked that my appeals be dismissed and my lawyers be dismissed so that I could be executed. I spent 23 years in solitary confinement. That means every day of my life I was locked up 23 hours a day while I was being openly tortured. They took me off of death row and they put me in a mental cell because they feared I was going to kill them for what they did to me. So I spent the last 8 months of my life in prison in a mental ward being told that no human being could endure what we did to you without you being angry enough to kill one of us. So we're not going to trust you until we open the door.
welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, the Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and Jake Wallace-Simons, editor of the Jewish Chronicle. I haven't got very much time in this section, but we are going to look at the Mail. It's also on the front of the Mirror, and there's a spread in the Times. The headline for the Mail: he stabbed Brianna because he hated trans people. She just wanted to kill for fun. This is a gruesome, gruesome tale.
Yeah, it's like something out of The Clockwork Orange, really. It's a really horrendous tale. Scarlett Jenkinson, they're both 16 years old, Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe. As the Mail said, he was motivated by some kind of transphobia and really seems like he was the follower in this. Scarlett Jenkinson seems to be the real ringleader. She tried to poison one of her schoolmates just months before she committed this murder with a cannabis sweet. She also tried to poison Brianna with an overdose of Nurofen before the stabbing. And she just did it all for some kind of grotesque fun and sadism. It's really an appalling story.
Yeah, and the Mirror also leading with that pure evil, their headline, Susie.
Yeah, I always have a problem with using that word because evil to me seems something that's somebody who's irredeemable, which I think a lot of people argue they're pretty close to it here, but also someone who is born and has no choice and just is going to do that, and there is no way around it, and it's predetermined almost, that it's beyond their control. I don't agree with that, and I think there's a piece inside the Times here which is talking about psychiatric assessments carried out on Scarlett. I mean, look, they're just a pair of spotty kids. They're a pair of spotty kids. And psychiatric assessment, she's got a severe form of conduct dissocial disorder, one of the features of which is a lack of empathy.
You don't say.
No, you don't say. But children learn empathy at 1, 2 years old. You can see it coming out of them when they do start to recognise that someone else is hurting. And I'm not in any way excusing what she's done, but I'm interested to know what went so terribly badly wrong, because no one is born able to commit this kind of crime. It has to be something that happens as a series of horrific wrong turns that have...
So are you saying that she's ill?
No, I want to know what's happened. I want to know what's caused
evil,
it,
what is?
in a way. Of course it's been... No, because even good and evil is like believing everything is to do with... It's predetermined by God and you can't get away around it. I do believe you have to be able to say that no one is born to commit this kind of crime, and it is possible to save people from committing that kind of crime.
Susie and Jake, thank you very much for taking us through the papers. Let's take a look at the weather for you now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The next few days will be rather dull with outbreaks of rain, but there'll be some brightness in the windy north tomorrow. Expect a very mild start to the weekend, especially in the south. It'll be rather grey there through the morning, with outbreaks of rain heavy over Wales and the south of Ireland. Further north, expect more in the way of sunshine, but Scotland will see showers, with snow possible on northern hills.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.